Hi there, and welcome to Friday Focus, where we do not focus on what is seen, but on what is unseen. And today we're going to be talking about the book of Esther. Esther is all about God behind the scenes, and it stars a young Jewish girl named Hadassah. She belonged to a family taken captive to Babylon, which by that time had become part of the Persian Empire. And as a young girl, Hadassah was removed from her guardian, Mordecai, and entered into a beauty contest. The prize would be King Xerxes and the title of Queen of Persia. Hadassah ended up winning the competition, and her name was changed to Esther, which means the star. Interestingly, Esther is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God. However, it doesn't mean that God was absent. Throughout the story, his presence is obvious, busily causing all things to work together for the good of his own people. There are some key verses that I've jotted down. The first one is from Esther chapter 2, the last part of verse 15. It says, "When Esther's turn to go to the king, when it was her turn, she accepted the advice of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her." And then there's Esther chapter 4, verse 14, which says, "If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just a time as this?" Another verse that I've noted is Esther chapter 6, the last part of verse 13. "Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him." And then finally, Esther chapter 7, verse 3. Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared." And this brings us to our questions that we have concerning the book. First of all, who wrote Esther? Well, the book doesn't mention its author. However, several possibilities have been thought of, discussed, or named. And they include Mordecai, a prominent figure in Esther, Ezra, as well as Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah, being a Persian court official, would have been familiar with its history and customs. Then, when was Esther written? Well, Esther was likely written between 470 BC and 424 BC, during the reign of Artaxerxes. And this is quite interesting, especially when we have already looked at the book of Ezra. The events in Esther likely occurred sometime during the book of Ezra, between chapters 6 and 7, the period between the first and second returns of the exiled Israelis. Well, where did Esther take place? The book is set in the Achaemenid or Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BC. One of 4 capitals was Susa, a former Babylonian city, which, by the way, is currently called Shush, and it's located in Iran. The Persian Empire stretched from today's Middle East all the way to India. Well, what was Esther about? Well, much like the book of Ruth, Esther was written most skillfully. It revolves around 8 feasts, which are used to build suspense as you read the book. The book of Esther can be divided into 3 main sections. We have chapters 1 verse 1 all the way through to chapter 2, verse 18, where Esther replaces Vashti as queen. Then chapter 2:19, starting in verse 19, all the way through chapter 7, verse 10, where Mordecai overcomes Haman. And then chapters 8, verse 1 through chapter 10, verse 3, Israel survives Haman's attempt to destroy them. Esther risked her life on behalf of her people, the Jews, at Mordecai's request. She took on the kingdom's second in command, a man by the name of Haman. As wise as she was beautiful, she proved to be a worthy adversary, skillfully outmaneuvering the official that was set on eradicating her and her people. Why was Esther written? Well, the purpose of Esther is to demonstrate God's providence, specifically regarding his people, Israel. The book introduces the Feast of Purim and the obligation to continually observe it. Esther is read at the Feast of Purim to commemorate God's deliverance of the Jews through Esther. And today, Jews still read the book of Esther during their Feast of Purim. Although God is not mentioned in the book, it is really obvious that the Jews of Susa sought his intervention when they fasted for 3 days. In Esther chapter 4, verse 16, it says, "Go and gather all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die." So what is the Esther takeaway? What is it that we can learn from the book of Esther that will impact our own lives? The book of Esther provides a look at Satan's fight against the plan of God as it pertains to his people Israel and the Messiah who had come from the Jewish people. Since the Messiah could only come from the Jewish people if the people existed, Satan's strategy was simply to eliminate the Jews. Satan is still engaged in attempts to destroy not only the Jews, but also God's church, those who have become his people through the new birth in Jesus Christ. As the Apostle Peter wrote, "Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. You see, Satan, through Haman, intended to hang Mordecai on a gallows over 7 stories high. Once this was done, there would be no resistance to the eradication of the Jewish people. However, Haman's plan backfired, and God brought about a great victory in that the very instrument Haman would use to extinguish the life of Mordecai was used to execute Haman and his sons. And so we are reminded that the cross upon which Satan planned to destroy the Lord Jesus has come back upon the devil's own head. The cross has become for all who would believe the power of God unto salvation. However, for Satan, it became not only his guilty verdict, but the instrument of his crushing defeat. Note the pronouncement in Colossians. He canceled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross. In this way, he disarmed the spiritual rulers and authorities. He shamed them publicly by his victory over them on the cross, Colossians chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. Do you remember the old hymn? On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross. Wow! The love of God in action. In his grace, this is Dr. Vic Hollyfriend. If you have any comments or questions, please get in touch with me at vixfridayfocus@gmail.com. God bless you. Have a great week.